Can I go? Everybody can hear me. Okay, hello Zoom. So my name is Casey Rust, and I work with the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. And we've been so happy to support and to work with 71.4 in growing and developing the Tenure Support Centre. And this has been such an important project. I think most of you have been with us for most of this journey. So the first thank you is to everybody here for all of the support that you've given and the interest and the curiosity. And it makes such a huge difference to get even a nod of interest when the work is really, really difficult. So for the whole team, thank you to everyone here, everyone on Zoom who's been interested in this project and supporting it. I think we can go to the next slide. We have had amazing funders who joined us from the very, very beginning when it was an idea and a really good concept, but we hadn't done anything yet. So set out here, I think our very first funder was the City Support Program, and Seth Makatuka in the back there has been our champion. And I think our champion, not just from the City Support Centre, but from his very own heart. So that's been really important, and he's been a member of our team. So thank you very much. We've also received support from Oppenheimer Generations here, and that has been wonderful. Ashley, thank you so much. Specifically supporting the operations of the Tenure Support Centre itself in Khayelitsha, which has created an evidence base to then articulate the issues as they extend further. But critically, that's where the action happens, because that's where the clients are addressed and supported and enabled. Then the First Rand Foundation has come in, and another support from Fundo Mabaso, who's here from FMB. First Rand Empowerment Foundation has given us support to work with the presidency's Operation Vulindlela, which is kind of like a red tape busting unit within the presidency. And that's been quite important in terms of the wider policy implications of the work. It's just starting now, but we're very grateful for First Rand's faith in the process to be there with us. We also received funding from MasterCard, from Cities Alliance. GTEC was part of National Treasury, and from Tough 21, who came in also in the early days. And then we have a number of private sector partners who work with us on a pro bono or on a discounted basis, who try to make things happen through their own personal networks within their organizations. STBB, Norton Fulbright, Adrian and Gross, and Abrams and Gross, sorry, and FMB. So thank you very much to everyone. So why do we do all of this? Why is there a need from a TSC? And you'll hear a lot about this from Lisa and from Ilana. But essentially, we have a great commitment and interest and promise that was made by the national government through its National Housing Subsidy Program to deliver subsidized houses to South Africans and to really transform the way our economy functions. And in a deeds registry today of about 6.7 million properties, residential properties, there are about just over 2 million government subsidized properties. And that's just astonishing, because that's a first asset that, of course, takes that household into the property market and into the local economy. And we'll hear about what all those linkages are. But we know that government has delivered more than that, many more. And there is a backlog, a title deeds backlog, that the National Department for Human Settlements has acknowledged and has been working very hard to address at national, at provincial, and at local level. And many of you are involved in that. And then there is a whole lot of activity that's happening within communities themselves, within neighborhoods, about how markets transact. And essentially, we have a system that's broken. And regular households either don't have title deeds to their properties because they're part of the backlog, or if they do have a title deed, in many cases that title deed is compromised for a whole range of reasons that really, I would argue, is about our failure as members of government and members of the legal fraternity and members of the financial sector in delivering services appropriately to low-income households living in these properties. And that's really what the TSC is about, is to represent the needs of those households who are living in properties where the title deed is not secure, where it has been compromised in one way or another, and to support them, because they really are driving this process themselves, to regularize their titles so they can participate in the economy, which is really the whole point. And it was why we started this in 1994 in the first place. So that's why we're here. Anyway, I'd like to hand over now to Lisa, and thank you all of you. Can I just say to those on Zoom, I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, just type them in the chat. And we will have time for discussion in this group. Have I forgotten anything?
Thank you, Kezia. Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Hitzebaut. I'm the attorney and conveyancer for the Tenure Support Centre. Just from me personally, it is so wonderful to see you all here today. You know, when you sit and you chip away at the coalface of very messy, very ugly work, you kind of think, oh, well, maybe we're the only people who are interested in it. It's really nice to have you here to listen to our learnings. I'm very excited to share them with you. Okay. So why the need for a TSC? Casey has given you the overall picture. What's happening nationally with the backlog, what's happening with compromised title deeds. We thought it would be useful to break it down for you on a neighborhood level. Why does it matter to households in a neighborhood? We selected an area known as Makaza in Khayelitsha. And fortuitously, when we first set up the TSC in 2018, we decided, I don't really know why, to set up our office in the middle of Makaza in Khayelitsha. And thank goodness we did, because the learnings that have come out of that area, just that one area, have been phenomenal. So Makaza is an area in Khayelitsha comprising just over 5,500 residential properties with a combined value of about 1.3 billion. We've taken that value roughly on an estimate of about 200,000 Rand a property. Not all of those properties are as yet on the valuation roll, so it is a little bit of a thumbsuck, but that's a ballpark, about 1.3 billion Rands worth of capital. So we want to break down Makaza for you and tell you exactly what we found in Makaza. In 2019, the TSC partnered with the city of Cape Town to basically look at three small areas, about 780 properties, where households had not received their title deeds from government. We worked very closely with Stefan Grobler's team to basically go in, enumerate those households, find out what was actually happening on the ground, bearing in mind these are households who have been living in that area since about 2008, 2009, so quite a long period that's elapsed, haven't yet received their title deeds, and we did a lot of work in that space on getting those transfers ready to move to a title deed. We'll touch, when we deal with the learnings on the primary transfer space, a little bit more detail on where that project is at the moment. But so you can see a big chunk of primary transfers in that space. We did some analysis in 2019 on Makaza. We looked at Home Affairs data versus Deeds Registries data, and pulled out that in the Makaza area, about 1 in 3 properties is registered in the name of a deceased person. 1 in 3. Now, that is of no use to anybody. It's of no use to the household who cannot do anything with their property. They can't access finance against their property. They can't improve their property. They can't apply for building plans. So 1/3 of those properties in the name of deceased people. It's also not helpful for the city of Cape Town at all. You have 290 million Rands worth of property in the name of dead people. They can't bill on those properties. They're not earning any income on those properties. I'm not going to touch on the the other facts on that slide for now. We'll deal with that later. Another issue in Makaza. Makaza has a very special problem referred to as the X properties. Depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different version of why those properties are the way they are. The way they are is that people were given occupation of those properties or took occupation of those properties almost 30 years ago, but the title deeds are in other people's names. The City of Cape Town has done quite a bit of work in that space to expropriate those properties back to the city so that corrective transfers can be done onto the people who are actually in occupation and have been in occupation for many, many years. But again, it's complicated. There's a lot of work to be done. You'll see the breakdown on that slide. Only 65 of those properties actually have subsidies approved against them, meaning they're good to go. The other 402, there's work to be done in that subsidy space before those corrective transfers can happen. Another issue, which is not specific to Makaza, we see it all over. Based on an occupancy survey in 2014, it was found that 732 properties in the Makaza area had either been informally sold or occupied illegally, so that the person who one would think should be in the property is not the person in the property. 2014 is a long time ago. We know from the day-to-day work that we do that this picture will look completely different by now. Of those 732, you can bet your bottom dollar that many of those have been flipped again. So you now have a double layer of trying to unravel who should be in the property. And of those 732 properties, close to 100 million rand in value that also has no secure title. So if we put all of that together in the Makaza space, what we see, the deceased estates, the informal sales, the expropriated properties, and the primary transfers, you've got almost half of the properties in that area that are compromised, that have a title deed problem. And what we've seen in the work that we do is it's not just one problem. It's very unlikely that you get somebody who comes to you having lived in a property for 15 years and it's a straight, clean problem. It's usually, I bought a property 20 years ago and that seller has now passed away. And during the time that I'm trying to sort it out, oh, I passed away. So my family is now also trying to resolve the issue with a family of somebody else who passed away. Sometimes those are also layered with primary transfers. Those are also layered with all sorts of other problems. So to 440 million rands worth of dead capital just in Makaza alone. I really like these slides. I think they give you such a snapshot of, if that is one area, it's not unique to this area. It is happening everywhere. Okay, so where does the TSC come in? We know that there are millions of low-income property owners in urban areas. Casey has touched on the figures in her first slide. And it's a two-pronged problem. The first part of the problem is getting the title deed to the beneficiary in the first place. The first transfer, the primary transfer from the government to that beneficiary is the first step. But there's a second step. Once you've given somebody a title deed, are they able to maintain that title deed in good order? Do they have access to the resources? Do they have the funds necessary to actually keep that title deed in good order? This is where the TSC comes in. So we offer support at both of those problem areas. The problem one, the primary transfer issue, we've given support by doing occupancy surveys, by validating beneficiary data, by facilitating the signing of documents that are necessary in that space. But I think where the TSC's strengths lie, and for me personally, the biggest learning in this space has been the individual case resolution where there is a problem. So there's a lot of work being done in the primary transfer space, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, not solely by the TSC, by many, many people. But I think what is very clear is that the easy ones, the ones where your person in the property is who you think should be the person in the property, Those are relatively easy to solve, relatively quick to solve. It's the problems that are not easy to solve. It's the cases of people who've moved away and sold, people who've divorced, people who've got married. You know, the government can't give a subsidy property to you twice. So if you happen, and funnily enough, we see this fairly often, if you happen to live next door to somebody that you then decide to get married to, you both end up waiting for a subsidy property. As a married couple, you shouldn't really get two bites of the cherry. What we're saying, our argument is that, well, that's not the fault of the household. They've been living there for 14 years, waiting for their title deed. They've only got married 5 years ago. Had you given them their title deeds timeously, it wouldn't have become an issue. So it's those messy cases that nobody really wants to solve because they take time. They're quite tedious, and it's very difficult work. But that is the strength of the TSC. That is the second aspect, the second problem area. That is really where we shine. So we have a walk-in office in Khayelitsha CBD, where we offer advice, and actually more than advice, real practical solutions for people with title deed problems. Okay. All right, just to touch very quickly on some of the other initiatives. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this slide because I've already, I think, made it fairly clear that we feel we are one of the few entities working in that difficult space. So yes, a client can go to pro bono, a client can go to the legal aid board and ask for assistance with a title deed problem. That takes it to a certain point. There are no real resources in that space to actually transfer properties. So it's kind of like put your hand up and hope that you find a conveyancer who'll do that work for you. We've tested that through pro bono. It's not easy. Some initiatives in the primary transfer space, Khayalam. I'm sure many of you will have heard of Khayalam. They have a very different model to ours. They engage with municipalities in the primary transfer space to look for projects that have become backlogged, that have got stuck. But they're really a funding model. They fund the beneficiary validation and the transfer process. And so their results are fantastic. They have transferred 10,000 title deeds since they set themselves up, which is obviously a phenomenal result and a great contributor towards that backlog. But very different to what we are doing. We're saying, okay, that's fantastic. Let's clear those easy ones, but who's going to do the hard ones? Okay, some other work, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this, some other work with the Mandeni and Kwadakuza municipalities, also on the primary transfer backlog, Geo Africa, who we've also partnered with on something I'll discuss a little bit later, to do some real work on what's causing those primary transfer backlogs, where there are land issues, where there are things that need to be resolved on the land, on the town planning side. So some really good work coming out there. And then Casey has already mentioned Operation Vulindlela. There's a very nice program through National Treasury to try and quantify the backlogs on an institutional level. And then the TSC, really focusing on individual case resolution. You come to me with a problem, I will really try my best to actually solve it for you. As at this morning, we have handed over, does that not include the 691 title deeds to date? So you can see our figures. I mean, if you look at that, 5 years of work, 691 title deeds, it's not madly impressive. Thank you. Thank you. Number-wise, it's not impressive, but I think that speaks to the nature of the problem, and that speaks to how hard it is to resolve those messy cases that nobody really wants to touch. Okay, the vision of the TSC, and I can remember so clearly sitting in one of my first meetings with Ilana and her explaining to me this triangular vision, a three-pronged approach. We're going to sort out the client on an individual case-by-case basis. That is predominantly what I do every day. Sit and look at client cases, figure out how we're going to solve them and solve them. But there's a second level, which is engagement with a service provider on both a public sector and private sector level. That's things like you've got a blockage in your transfer process with rates clearance. You need to be able to engage with your local authority. How are we going to actually fix that problem? So a lot of work, that similar kind of work in that space. And then ideally, on the third tier, policy making. So identifying and documenting the things that we see on the ground, the problems on cases, and actually escalating those up the line, Office of the Presidency, National Treasury, provincial human settlements, national human settlements, to try and cause or create policy change, legislative change that can really unblock those barriers that we see to transfer. Okay. So the model that we have come up with, or that we have got ourselves to 5 years down the line, is that we believe the biggest barrier in this market is the cost of transfer. You know, you've got somebody who's on a SASSA pension, 2,080 Rand a month. You're now asking them, their property happens to be valued at 250,000 Rand. You're asking them to go to a conveyancer and pay 9,784 Rand to do the transfer. I mean, 5 times your monthly income just to sort out your title deed. It's just not affordable. So what we have done is we have categorized our clients based on income. Clients who earn less than, we've put there 8,000, it's a very fuzzy figure. We have stripped out the costs. So we work with our partner conveyancers. They don't charge for their conveyancing services. It's all done pro bono. They are expected to pay disbursements out of their own pocket, which are still not insignificant. You know, 1,800 Rand in disbursements when you're an assassin a pensioner is not insignificant. So the learning that came out of that, and seeing that lots of matters get blocked at the point of having to ask clients to pay, we decided that we as the TSC would actually fund the costs for SASSA pensioners and for people on disability grants. And that has been, I think that's really opened up a lot of channels for our clients to actually finally get their title deed. I'll talk more on the figures on those a little bit later. Okay, this is really why we do what we do. You know, these are the pictures that make our day on a Friday. Just this morning, Ilana and Kesia and were out at our office in Khayelitsha with some of the F&B staff and handed over 5 title deeds. Just to see, it's not only, you know, what we talked about in the beginning. You look at Makaza as a neighborhood and you look at all that dead capital that households can't leverage, that the city can't build on. It's more than that. It's life-changing for these individual homeowners. I mean, it's just a little snippet there of the kind of messages we get from our clients. You know, they've been waiting 12, 18 years for their title deed. They finally get it. I don't think you or I can actually imagine, you know, what peace of mind that gives them. Okay, let's have a little look at some of our client cases. So putting aside for the time being the Makaza project that I discussed initially, the 780 properties with the primary transfer backlog, we've also seen 1,027 walk-in client cases. So those are clients that have actually physically been through our office. 72% of those have a title deed problem. Well, you might ask, well, why have the other 28% come to you if you don't have a title deed problem? That's things like retrospective subsidy applications, lease agreements, wills, some other work that we do in that space. But the predominant number of clients who come to us have a title deed problem. And we've just categorized them there in those boxes below. Very heavy on the deceased estates. We see that's still probably the biggest area that we work in, followed closely by informal sales, regularizing sales that have happened off the deeds registry and trying to bring them onto the deeds registry. A lot of primary transfers still coming through separate to the Makaza project. So from all over, we get primary transfer queries and then some other work in the administrative space, donations, divorces, things like that. What's important to note on this slide is that these, as I mentioned in the beginning, these layers are not mutually exclusive. They are layered one on top of each other, and it's unpicking and unraveling that is the challenge. Just very quickly on our client demographics, by far the most clients we see are single women. 57% of our clients are single women. Just on income, most of our clients, almost half of our clients fall within the pro bono threshold. 18% of them don't. 12% of them don't, and then 18% of them are those pensioners and indigents that we actually foot the bill for. And then just some age demographics there, quite evenly split across the age ranges. All right, so what is our model and why do we believe that our model is a good model? So basically, when we first started the TSC, I can remember going and knocking on the doors of conveyancers, cap in hand, and asking them to please assist us with pro bono conveyancing work. And everybody, or most people, looked at me and said, the work is too messy, we don't like it, it takes too long. And so we thought really hard that the way we need to sell it to people is we actually do all the work. So the first part of the process, we onboard the client, we decide how a case is going to be resolved, we figure out a solution, we do all the messy stuff. And then we present you as the conveyancer with a beautifully packaged transfer ready to go. And I'm not making eye contact with any of our conveyancers in the room because they're going to tell me that that's not how it goes. But that's what we try, that's what we aim for. As a team, we're a very small team, a very, very small team. It's actually just myself and Sona, my wonderful client liaison officer and assistant. So she sees all the clients, she gets a matter basically ready for instruction, and then I basically do all the legal side of things on a matter. When we've got a problem, what do we do to unstick the problem, etc., etc. Then we work at the moment, our dedicated conveyancing partner is STBB. So over the years, we have worked with different conveyancers. Norton Rose was the first firm to put up their hand and get on board. Worked with them for a good few years in the beginning, and then after that, Abrams and Gross also did some wonderful work for us. But at the moment, we have a dedicated resource through STBB, and the reason we moved towards that model as opposed to trying to reach out to many, many conveyancers, is we realized that we actually can't expect a pro bono matter in any big law firm is always going to be the bottom of the pile, unfortunately. You're just not going to get the turnaround times or the results that you're looking for unless we believe you have a dedicated resource. So I can't remember the timelines, maybe 2 years ago, we approached STBB and said, what about if we get a dedicated resource within your office? And that wonderful dedicated resource is here today, Lungalwa. We will pay for that resource. So you hire them, they are your employee, but we will pay for that resource. And we believe that that is really contributed to our figures in terms of being able to move things through the pipeline more quickly. We've also just recently had discussions with STBB about a dedicated master's clerk. So we'll look, when we look at some of our learnings in the deceased estate space, one of our huge blockages is the master's office. I have tried in the beginning to go there and resolve matters myself. I mean, it's a joke. So the thinking is with a dedicated paralegal and a dedicated master's clerk, that should really make a difference to numbers. I'm not going to talk too much on this slide, just to show the different entities that we deal with, whether it's the property owner, whether it's human settlements in the city on primary transfers, whether it's revenue in the city on some of the issues around rates clearances, the arrear municipal bills, trying to get those sorted out so that we can pass transfer. The master's office, obviously a big one. I'll touch on that more when we deal with deceased estates, provincial human settlements in the subsidy space, and then obviously your conveyancer taking it through to the end. So just a quick oversight on where we get our clients from. Still, by far the biggest is word of mouth. So you see your neighbor gets his title deed and you've been living in the same property next door to him for 12 years. Why do I not have my title deed? So by far the biggest referral still coming there. Local radio, we did a lot of work on Radio Zibanele back in the day. Haven't recently, but that generated quite a big client base for us. Number 5, we've recently done quite a nice little sort of standalone project with Ikamva Bantu. Some of you may be familiar with the work they do, a lot of work in low-income areas in ECDs, but also with the elderly. And did a clinic for them in May, June, onboarding 70 of their pensioners with title deed issues. What was quite interesting for me through the Ikamva Bantu experience was one of the clinics was in Gugulethu, and it was a very nice snapshot for me of you going to a different area. Now, we've predominantly been working in Khayelitsha. We do have clients from other areas, but you go into Gugulethu and you get 40 clients, and the picture looks quite different. Not in terms of they're not problems, and not in terms of probably your figures are probably the same, but the nature of the problem is a little bit different. So Gugulethu, obviously being an older township, a little bit more established than Khayelitsha, a lot more deceased estates. In fact, I would say 90% deceased estates coming through in that space. And then number 6, very encouraging for us. So the city of Cape Town did quite a big rah-rah road show in June, July of this year. We want to give you your title deed. We want to hand out your title deed. Please come. We're going to have community meetings. You must come and collect your title deed. And wonderful. A lot of people did get their title deeds. The people who didn't get their title deeds, who arrived at the office after having been invited, please come and get your title deed. I'm sorry, there is no title deed for you yet, but what you can do is you can phone the TSC. So that is very encouraging for us. It's government recognizing that whether they don't have the resources, the capacity, or the skill set to sort out that issue, there is somebody who could maybe help. We also get a lot of referrals of clients through Provincial Department of Human Settlements. People go to Human Settlements saying, where's my title deed? We don't know, but why don't you phone the TSC? So very encouraging for us. Okay, just a little breakdown on our results to date. So of the 1,027 clients that have walked through our door, about 350 of those are active, meaning we are working on them. We are getting them ready for transfer. We're getting them ready to go into the deeds office. 100 are with our conveyancers, which is not an insignificant amount, and 200 have registered to date. Now, what's interesting for me in the 100 with conveyancers, 200 registered to date, it speaks to me it's a resourcing issue. So if you've got 100 matters sitting with a conveyancer, even with a dedicated paid resource, you still struggle to get them through the pipeline as quickly as you'd like, as quickly as the households would like. So when Ilana talks to the vision going forward, I think there's definitely, one must take cognizance of the fact that we could move that 100. If we could move that 100, say in 3 to 4 months through the pipeline with perhaps additional resources, you adding to your bottom line by 50% in a couple of months. So it's not a question of we can't get the matters ready for instruction. We can. They are there. It's getting them through the pipeline. And then just interestingly, 329 matters closed. Why? That's almost a third of our caseload that is closed. And why is that? That's predominantly because clients lose interest in the formal process, unfortunately. It feels too tedious for them as it does to us, you know, from time to time. They feel what we're asking them is too difficult. It's taking too long. They have to engage with people they don't want to engage with. There's also some work to be done in that space with disputed properties. So there's a lot of family disputes and problems, title deeds of this nature. And we don't actually have a solution for those. So there are some, you know, we're not going to stand up here and say we can solve every problem. There are some that we can't solve. And so some work still to be done on that space. Just to mention the 200 that we've registered to date, we must also add the 486, which is today the 491, title deeds through the Makaza blockchain project. Okay, so what have we learned? I'm not going to go through this process of the deceased estate in great detail because I think it's quite tedious. But the deceased estate process is actually, in my opinion, a very good one. It's very simple. It's legislated very well. It's an easy process to follow. And the Master's Office fulfills a very critical role in the deceased estates process in hopefully overseeing or ensuring that assets are transferred to the people they should be transferred to. Having said that, our experience in the Master's Office, and obviously we've only got experience in the Cape Town Master's Office, is nothing short of abysmal. There are too many blockages that stop a matter from moving down the pipeline. Ironically enough, you actually, on a small estate, so an estate valued at less than 250,000 Rand, you actually only need to interact with the Master's Office twice. You need to report the estate and get your letters of authority issued, and you need to request a next of kin affidavit twice. And you'll see on the next slide how long those processes take. Okay, so what we did was we just tracked 64 of our document requests that we submitted to the master from the period June 2021 to date. We have only received 25% of those documents that we've requested. 1/4 of those documents have we actually received. I think, to be fair, one must just put it in context. It is post-COVID. The master's office was very hard hit by COVID, was closed for a very long time, during which time the backlog just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I do think there's still some fallout from that. Also, the deeds of the master's office system was hacked, which also put them out of action for a while. But basically, if we look at our figures, 7 to 8 months roughly is on average what we are waiting for to get documents from the master. And it is one document. It is one document which we 9 times out of 10 have actually prepared and submitted, but we now need you to send it back to us to verify that it's been through your office. Okay, and 23% of those document requests outstanding for more than a year. All right, just in terms of documents aside resolving deceased estate cases, I'm quite encouraged by this little circle at the bottom, Ilana less so. 37% of our deceased estate cases we can resolve in a period of a year. Now, I don't think that's terrible. I mean, obviously one would like it to be quicker, but almost 40% of deceased estate cases can be solved in that time period. Now, if you look back at the Makaza, the 5,000 properties in Makaza, and the fact that 1/3 of those are deceased estates, imagine if you could at least push 40% of those through the deeds office in a year. That's significant. That's not a small number. All right, so our key learnings in the deceased estate space. We know the master's office is critical. We have no choice but to go through the master's office, but it is too slow, it's too inefficient. And our learning, our biggest takeaway is that without a dedicated resource, you're actually not going to get anywhere. There is no process by which you can follow up, by which you can, without physically going to the master's office. The master's office actually has quite a nice digital system, which they themselves have put together. It's been up and running, I think, since about 2008. Huge potential there to digitize, huge potential to be able to request documents electronically, possibly even to be able to submit documents electronically. So some work to be done in that space. The other big leap forward for us, which is very exciting, is that your large estates, so your estates that are valued over 250,000 Rand, a more cumbersome and a more costly estate process. When we first had clients come to us to say, my estate, I have one property, that is all I have. It happens to be valued at 265,000 Rand, so I am over the estate's threshold. I've been to an attorney and they've told me it's going to cost me 3.5% of the estate value to wind up, which is by tariff what an attorney is entitled to charge. You work that out, 14,000 Rand for somebody living in this area with a very nominal income. It's just not affordable. So over the years, what we've tested and tried and had our first few successes with is that we now do that in-house. I mean, I'm no estate lawyer, but I have become an estate lawyer by the process. And we have proved that it can be done. You can, I mean, okay, it can be done through the TSC. I'm not sure it can be done anywhere else besides, other pro bono attorneys who are prepared to offer that service. I've touched on the no mechanism for dealing with disputes. Actually, that should be a master's office function. We've had matters where there is a family dispute. The master's indicated that they will call a family meeting and try and resolve the dispute, and we haven't had any success in that area. And then just the last point, very interestingly, the clients that we are seeing are preferring, instead of doing a will. So wills are not very common in this market. People are mistrustful of wills. I think it also feeds into the traditional African succession, their own laws of succession, which look very different to what ours do. They would rather transfer the property now into their children's names than do a will, leaving the property to their children in the hopes that when their children who are most probably all unemployed, in the hopes that their children will get it right to do it themselves once they pass away, in the hopes that the TSC will still be around to do it for them at an affordable cost. Okay, some learnings in the informal space, informal sales space. So we know that people transact with their properties very differently in townships. Whereas you or I might go to an attorney or to an estate agent and sign a sale agreement and send it to a conveyancer and have it registered. I think we understand that that is a normal process. It's not a normal process in low-income areas. They transact by way of affidavit. They transact by way of a letter from their street committee. And one of the more common ones is if I'm the seller and I give you my title deed and my ID, then that is as good as a sale. So I don't think I'm going to spend much time on this slide. There's a lot in here. Basically, two aspects of informal sales. It all depends on what evidence there is of the sale as to how likely you are to be able to resolve it. So we always laugh about one of our clients whose father bought a property 20-something years ago by exchanging 2 cows. She doesn't know who that person was that he bought it from. She has nothing on paper and now has come to us and asked us to help her. You know, there are some cases that are just, I'm going to say, impossible to solve, but there are a lot of cases that are possible to solve. If you have good evidence of the sale, even though it might not be evidence that you or I recognize, and if you can find your sellers, and if your sellers are prepared to cooperate with you, it's fairly easy to regularize those. We're quite excited. We're testing a process at the moment through BDP. Attorneys have also come on board and very kindly offered to do some pro bono work for us in that space, is where your sellers will not cooperate or where you can't find them anymore. It's a 20-year-old sale. We've tried to trace them. Nobody knows where they are. We're looking at a magistrate's court application to basically to ask the court for an order that sale be upheld on the basis of the evidence that there is. So that's very exciting for us, and that potentially could clear another 10 to 20 of our clients that are stuck. Okay, informal cash sales, quite a lot quicker to resolve than deceased estates, average 17 months. Okay, that's not very quick, but a lot of the delays in that space have to do with uncooperative sellers. You think they're going to cooperate, they do, and then they decide not to, etc., etc., etc. Again, the circle at the bottom encouraging, 40% of our informal cash sales do get resolved within the first year, which is not insignificant. All right, our key learnings from the informal sales space. It's messy. It is messy work. Nobody wants to touch it. It is layered. It is fighting with sellers. It's fighting with the family of deceased sellers. It is messy work. The second biggest factor for us is the cost of accessing the formal registration system. And we've already talked to how we've tried to strip out those costs. Just in the policy space, when I showed you that triangle where we try to move our learnings up the triangle, you know, I think of, for example, trying to get the small estates threshold increased. It's 250,000. It's been 250,000 since 2016, I think. So that's coming up for 8 years, that threshold hasn't been adjusted. The implications from a cost perspective, from a time wastage perspective, by having your property value just slightly too high, you get stuck in a long and cumbersome process. So those are the kind of things that we try to escalate up the line in the informal cash sales space, in the deceased estate space. The third point, that we need to create a legal precedent for cases where you can't find your seller, where you can't find your heirs of your deceased seller. And that's the application that we're currently testing, which is very exciting. We did do a lot of work on the Land Titles Adjustment Act, which is another piece of legislation which is quite powerful in terms of allowing the appointment of a commissioner to adjudicate on disputed property transactions or on property transactions that are layered. But for various reasons, various challenges in that space, it's not really, we don't think, a viable option at the moment. And then on current sales, so what is also interesting for me, if I look back at 2018, the sales that were coming through our doors were historic sales, old sales, 10, 15, 20 years old. I've never known how to regularize. I've never had the money to regularize. Please help me. What we're seeing now, and we don't really understand why, but what we're seeing now is that we're getting a lot more sales that are very, very recent. So that the transaction will still happen informally on the basis of a negotiation between you and me verbally and maybe swapping some documents. But those purchases are very quickly coming into our office and saying, please, will you help me formalize? So that is encouraging. And we think, well, we like to hope that it's because the buyers are becoming increasingly aware of those risks if they do it informally and leave it informal for too long. The preemptive clause, the Section 10A of the Housing Act, which prohibits subsidized properties from being sold for a period of 8 years from various factors, from registration, from acquisition of the property. We believe is a huge backlog. It's a huge barrier to moving matters through the pipeline. At least in the Western Cape, we are fortunate where there is a waiver process that we can apply to human settlements for a waiver, allowing us to sell that property or allowing that property to be sold. But from what we've heard in the rest of the country, not so easy to get those waivers through. And the point we always make on the waivers is it's further complicated by your primary transfer backlog. It's very different to say, I'm giving you this property in 2021 and you decide in 2022 to sell it. That's very different to, I gave you this property in 2008, but unfortunately I haven't given you your title deed until 2021. You've now been living in that property for 13 years and I'm going to slap another 8 years on. You know, I mean, that's just not feasible for the individual property owner. And then also quite exciting for us is that the proof of the transaction is critical. At the moment, people have affidavits, they have Sanco street committee letters, which is all paper-based. We would love to see some work in the space of recording those transactions in a digital way, in a way that protects the rights of both parties, and in a way that is a record of how that transaction sits until such time as it can be formalized in the deeds registry. All right, some learnings in the primary transfer space. So if we have a bit of a closer look at the Makaza pilot that we did in 2019, of the 780 properties, 486 have already been transferred with a value of close to 100 million. So that is encouraging. 12 in process with the conveyances at the moment. And another, the yellow line, very interesting, 81 beneficiaries that could come in and sign their documents and get their title deeds, but haven't. Not something that we really understand. I mean, you're entitled to a property, you are the beneficiary. Why would you not come in and sign? But that is, I mean, that is the reality of it. And then a further 201 properties that need further investigation, or where the properties weren't surveyed in the original occupancy survey. A lot of people, or some people, reluctant to cooperate with the field workers, or just not there when the surveys were done. This reddish block at the bottom is, as I mentioned at the beginning, where the TSC really comes to the fore. You know, this is the area that is stuck. These are the 201 properties out of 780 that can't be transferred for various reasons. People have got married, people have got divorced, people have moved away, people have died. And that is the messy bit. That is where the work really needs to be done. Okay, so of the 480, if we take the 486 properties that have already been transferred, we add the 12 that are in process, and we add the 81 that are eligible to transfer, you get 579. So 74% of that pilot area that we did able to be transferred. That is encouraging. That is with a occupancy survey done through a private entity like us, beneficiary validation, walk everybody through the process, you can churn out 74% of your backlog. The bottom block is where the mess sits, but where the learnings come. So When we first started, I can remember, well, for the first thing I can remember, and Ilana and I always laugh about this, what is a primary transfer? I don't think we had any concept of what that entailed, what the complexities were around that. Ilana was speaking a speak that I had no idea, what she was talking about. Now what we know, and what we've actually run through the process with a lot of these on a case-by-case basis, is we know that there's a lot of ways of solving the mess. So, if, for example, you have a primary transfer property that hasn't been transferred, but that has been sold, what can you do? There are various things you can do. You can do a back-to-back transfer, municipality to beneficiary onto the purchaser. Or you can try and circumvent that process, because obviously there's a cost implication for your purchaser having to pick up the second leg of the transaction. You can circumvent that and say, well, hang on a second, why can I not just pop my purchaser in directly? Substitute them as a beneficiary, do it that way. So lots of learnings in that space, lots of learnings in the non-qualifier space. So people who either never qualified as a beneficiary or by the effluxion of time no longer qualify as a beneficiary. So some learnings that have come out of that space. And then obviously also in the deceased estate space, that there are things you can do in the primary transfer space where there are deceased estates involved. Okay, so the primary transfers, the walk-in clients, so now not the Makaza blockchain project, and the walk-in clients, the learnings that the main learnings that have come up for us is actually as a result of that roadshow I mentioned that the City of Cape Town did in June, July of this year. The client comes in and says to you, I have a property in this area. This is my earth number. I don't have a title deed. It's very difficult, even as the TSC and even with our contacts in the city, it's very difficult to determine where those primary transfer projects are, who the project manager is, who's responsible for them, have conveyancers been appointed. It's very difficult to find out where you slot into that process. In some cases, the projects haven't kicked off yet. In some cases, there are land issues preventing those registrations from happening. Yeah, so those are the learnings in that space. On the pilot, on the Makaza blockchain pilot, I think because we had such a nice big chunk of properties, we learned so much that we wrote a toolkit. Some of you will be familiar with our toolkit. And I'm nearly at the end of what I want to say, so bear with me. We actually, in conjunction with Geo Africa, created 2 toolkits, which we believe are very nice, practical guidelines on how to solve that messy bit. So the 201 properties in Makaza that were stuck in the messy bit, how you can actually solve them. So we ourselves as the TSC put together the beneficiary administration toolkits. And what it does is it actually asks a series of questions. Is your beneficiary alive? Is your beneficiary deceased? Is your beneficiary remarried? Is your beneficiary living in the property? Is your beneficiary moved away? And depending on what your answers are, it feeds you through a very nice, very succinct process and makes suggestions on how those could actually be resolved. The land and planning regularization component was put together primarily by Geo Africa, and that goes a step back. That looks at what the issues are before you get to beneficiary administration, before you get to title deeds. So are there problems with the general plan? Are there problems with bulk services? What is actually preventing your project from taking off? We've tried with limited success to disseminate these toolkits, and we've had some sessions with various local authorities, with various provincial municipal officials to try and share our toolkit, to try and get people to use our toolkit. Nobody is really using our toolkit. So some more work to be done in that space because we believe in it. We think it's a wonderful guideline. And then lastly, just to touch on some learnings in the administrative cases. So the main problems we see in the administrative cases are errors on the title deed. If I look at title deeds from the late 80s and early 90s, not a lot of cognizance of marital status. Obviously customary wives were treated very differently then to how they're treated now. So often just completely left off the title deed, lots of errors on names, ID numbers. There was, of course, also a big shift when the Identification Act came into effect with people's ID numbers changing. So quite a lot of work to be done in that space. The main challenges we find in that space is that your deeds office, the proof that the deeds office asks for is quite subjective. It seems to differ quite a lot from case to case. So it's difficult to know that you're going to get it right on any particular application. And of course, the burden of the cost of this falls on the individual property owner. Not really fair if I get a title deed from government and you've spelt my name wrong. I must now pay to have it fixed, but that is the reality. The second category we find is missing or damaged title deeds. We have a very easy process, that we do to get you a replacement original title deed. But again, the cost falls on the individual property owner. And often, we're finding it often, title deeds that were never handed over from government can now no longer be located. It's been 15 years. Why should you as the homeowner pay for the cost of replacing that title deed? And then the last category is, I can see, you come to me, you say, I've never received my title deed. I can see your property's been registered in your name, but nobody knows where the title deed is. We've had quite a lot of, experience over the years of different areas of the city, different areas of province, and the sort of the mess that is the title deed handover process. From being told, we recently dealt with a small municipality up the West Coast, and were told that we have hundreds of title deeds sitting in boxes under desks and no process and no plan to hand them out. So this is a huge problem. A lot of work to be done in that space in terms of digitizing where title deeds are sitting, who they get handed out to, etc., etc. That is it from me. I'm going to hand over to Ilana to talk a little bit on the way forward.
So that was it. Thanks very much. I'm gonna be brief. You'll be relieved to hear. I just want to say thank you to Jess just before I go on, just because I know when we get to the end, everyone wants to just have a drink and not to hear thank you. But this whole presentation Jess put together, and not only that, was doing a whole lot of other things. We've got a social media campaign for the TSC that's kicking off, so she's running with that and doing a whole lot of other project work as well. And just a real privilege to work with someone like Jess, obviously a privilege to work with Lisa. Sona, seriously would have given up a long time ago. So let's just talk about going forward. I think we know why it matters, and I think a lot of the focus that we traditionally have on why title deeds are so important really places the title deed in the private domain, and this is around giving peace of mind to the individual, allowing the individual to leverage property, to build wealth, etc. I think it's really important not to forget the role that the title deed plays in enabling cities to govern and manage the city. How does a city know who owns a property? Well, they know who owns a property because that information comes from the deeds registry, gets fed in through the property valuation, the property value chain. So it's really important for the city. It's also really important for the banking sector. How is the banking sector going to participate in low-income areas when there's no clear evidence of who owns property? That just takes a whole class of lending off the books of the banks. And I just want to mention the banks in particular because of our relationship with FNB, and we've been speaking to FNB for so many years. And really, I can't see him, Fundo. I saw him before we started. I think he might have had to leave. But we couldn't do what we do without the assistance of FNB because we're in their bank branch. And we think that relationship with the banks is really critical in how we think about going forward. It's allowed us, being in their branch, has allowed us to professionalize our service, to portray an image to the client of a professional service. This is not just an NGO that happens to be there today and won't be there tomorrow. Just like you expect your bank to be there in the future, we expect to be there, and you can come to us, we're there. I think for us operationally, it's made an enormous difference that we are not in the pocket of a councillor. We want to depoliticize the issue of title deeds. It's not a political issue. This is a personal issue. This is your asset, just like your bank account is your asset. Your house is your asset. So I think to really emphasize this point around bankability and the role going forward of banks in hopefully solving this at scale. We can go to the next slide. Well, this was the vision. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how well we're doing. I think we want to keep fighting on. I think we're getting good at solving those client cases. I think we're getting good at working with the service providers, and in particular, the City of Cape Town. And just, again, to just mention some people in the room who allow us to do our work. I mean, Stefan sitting at the back, Stefan Grobler. We could not have done the title deed project in Makaza without him, and he took a real risk on working with us. So I think those relationships with the cities, those relationships with the banks, that's the middle layer, the service provider layer. The policy space, maybe not so much. And if we go on to the next slide, what we were hoping was that that policy space was where we'd really see some traction. And we have made some progress. And Seth, I mean, you can pester him during our drinks and ask him for his views on this, because Seth and Corin are in that space and they're working there for us as outsiders, trying to engage, not quite understanding why this is not the priority we think it is, why people can't just do things. You know, we know the smaller states threshold needs to be changed. So you're the Department of Justice, change it. What's the problem? We don't get it. We don't understand how government works. Very difficult to try and get traction at that level. There's some very, very basic things that we can't do. For instance, we can't get deeds office data. We cannot get deeds transactions data. So we cannot see what's actually going on. This is bizarre, but it's the fact, and it's because there's a law in the Act of 1937, I think it's Section 9, that says the deeds office is a trading account and has to charge for its data. Well, you think there's a workaround, you think there's a sensible solution, but lo and behold, it turns out there isn't. The same with Section 10A on this ridiculous law, and let's call it what it is, a ridiculous law that criminalizes a normal activity. Buying and selling a house, it's something we all do. It's criminalized, you know, and I happened to be reading the Hebrew Bible the other day, and I see a line in the book of Amos, and it says, you have made humble people walk a crooked path. That's what we've done. We've made it impossible for people to live their lives without breaking the law. That's because of the laws that we've created. You would think that by now someone would change that law, but unbelievable, when we have meetings with officials, they still talk about illegal sales. This is an illegal sale. And then you put up your hand and say, excuse me, can we use the word illegal a little bit more judiciously? Maybe it's an informal sale, but buying and selling a house is not criminal activity. Sometimes it is when there are criminals involved. These are good citizens. These are nice people. They're not criminals. So I think, you know, human settlement, some of the things we thought would be obvious, we're not really getting a lot of traction on this. I think where we're finding the most willing partners is in the municipalities. I think the municipalities are really feeling the pain of this. They're the guys who either have the problem of sorting out the title deed backlog sitting on their desks, or they're the revenue department not able to send a bill to the right person, or they're the planning department who can't get plans from someone because they don't own a house that they want to build on. So I think the municipality is probably where we've got the most traction. I think interesting, we categorized things initially into low-hanging fruit. Really important to remember that the problem with low-hanging fruit is that it rots. And unless you act, you lose that golden opportunity. And in the case of titling, things don't resolve on their own. They get worse. So if you don't fix the titling problem now, when you come back to it in 5 years' time, it becomes way more difficult to solve, because unfortunately people die, they get married, they sell, even if it's illegal, they get divorced, and by the time you need to come and sort this out, 5 years has elapsed, and now you've got that much more complexity on this. So I think we were ambitious about calling things low-hanging fruit. We haven't really seen any traction on this. We keep pushing on, but the reality is it's unlikely that we're going to see any significant change in the realm of government. And so what do? Well, you get on with the job. Just get on with it. And really it's about setting up replicas of the TSC. And I think, unfortunately, we've all been, I suppose, influenced a little bit by the IT world, where we're looking for scalable, magically replicable solutions to everything. It's probably not the case. Yes, there's a lot we can do in our operations to strip out costs and to increase efficiencies. But at the end of the day, unraveling a ball of wool is hard work. You know, there's a saying, a Russian saying, apparently, it says, it's easy to turn an aquarium into a fish soup. It's very difficult to turn a fish soup back into an aquarium. And that's what we've got. We've got a fish soup around our cities, and we've got to turn it back into an aquarium. And if we don't do it, it's just going to get worse. So best we get on with the job. And we need to resource it, and we need to do it quickly. We need to get on with it. So a couple of points that we can see. Certainly there is an opportunity for technology, and Lisa, I'm sure, can tell you how she's running at the moment of multiple spreadsheets and sending instructions to Sonos, working off those spreadsheets, not terribly efficient. Our interaction with clients, a lot of that could be automated as well. The validation of data on property ownership at the moment, quite a tricky challenge for us because we don't have access to the deeds data. And then critically, this idea of enabling clients to maintain evidence of their own claim to a property. And there's a whole wonderful world of self-sovereign ID and solutions coming out. India is a wonderful case study of something called DigiLocker that allows the individual to request and maintain all those official documents and then share them digitally with third parties. That's probably the core of this. And if we can build that core, you know, maybe Home Affairs one day will come to the party. Maybe the Department of Justice one day will come to the party. But in the meantime, that's there. And we already know that the lawyers that we work with, STBB, have got a digital solution. These are things we need to just start looking at and leveraging in the meantime. Other TSCs, we need more TSCs. And I've spoken a little bit, I'm going to move on to the partnership with the private sector. We've spoken a little bit about the role that the bank has played, FNB. I cannot tell you how it simplified our lives to have the operation running out of FNB. First of all, Sona will tell you that in the old days, Wi-Fi, major problem. When we have load shedding, every time we have load shedding for 2 hours in the city, it's 4 hours in Khayelitsha. Okay, we couldn't get our backup to last for 4 hours. Not to mention, again, this political kind of oversight, and you never know what's going to happen. And then, of course, there was a little bit of instability in the area, and our office got burnt down as a collateral damage to a city, what would we call it? I can't remember the word. What do we use in South Africa for these? Service delivery protests. There we go. Service delivery protests. Our office got burnt down. So I think the bank really critical, and we'd want to see that. And then the additional partnerships with conveyancers. And we're looking forward to more work going forward with Norton Rose, with Mika, bringing on additional conveyancers, the same model. We'll bring on the paralegal person. That will be funded. The master's clerk can be funded. Let's just get more conveyancers doing this and make it easy for conveyancers. We'd like the bank, and we spoke to them this morning about putting a little bit of pressure on their panel attorneys to put up their hand to do more pro bono work, because this work has to be done. And then, of course, the TSC's learnings, they are there in the public domain. I mean, we're a little bit reluctant about publishing too many toolkits because we're worried that a whole lot of those properties owned by deceased people could be wound up by criminals. So we're just a little bit careful about what kind of information we want to get out there into the public domain. But to just write the toolkits on this is how you deal with this. That's critical for us. And then the relationships with municipalities. Yes, the province is important for the subsidy and the waivers, but it's the municipalities. We get stopped at the rates clearance. We need to be able to pick up the phone and say to someone, please just sort this out. This is a long-standing arrears matter. Can we have a plan? Can we have a write-off? Can we do something? So I think those are the ingredients. And this question about funding, I think this is a fundable project for the time being. And I'm saying that looking at our donor. For me, the payoff is very, very significant in so many ways for that property owner, for the cities, for the private sector in general, just to entrench again this rule of law and governance at the base of how cities are run. This is our estimate of what an office would cost. And it's just pretty much, hire in the administrative layers, bring in that senior paid for conveyancing experience who can put a layer of oversight on what happens and work well with the conveyancers. So that's I think where we're thinking about going forward. We would love to hear other people's views. I mean, we don't always love to hear them, but we will eventually listen to them. But I think this idea of how do we do this more, do this better, get more people doing this, because it feels to us that the only way to solve this very difficult problem is to put your head down and do the work. So I'm going to leave it there and hand over to Kesia. I think there have been some questions online and there might be some questions on the floor. So thank you very much.
Thank you. What do you need? That, yes, there we go. Good questions. There aren't any yet online. I've just invited everyone to do that, to send questions through. So if you're online, please type in your questions. But any from the floor? You and then Ashley. Yes, you first.
Fine. Hi, thanks very much for all the info you shared. So what I would like to urge TSC and funders to do would be to put in a baseline study into all your cases that you've solved or not being able to solve for that matter, but I'm now talking about the cases you've solved, to track them longitudinally over time. Because what I'm hearing all the presentation is that the transfer, once the transfer is done, that's like Christmas and everything's fantastic. Oh, transfer added wonderful statistics that you've been talking about, and I'm certainly the work you do is completely remarkable. But you need to follow up those, because I'm an historian of property in a way. I look at it sociologically over time as an historian, and studying title deeds, how they work, in my case, studies over a 100-year period. And the reversion to what you would maybe call informality is huge. I don't necessarily use that language, but they re-informalize. And the reason for that is you have to delve deep into sociology and customary law to understand that. So while I think a lot of your solved cases are going to stick, in, you know, where it's a good fit, there's some that aren't, and they're going to go back. So are you putting in that baseline study to track over time? Are these transferred ones going to stick? And if they don't, why not? And if you'd like to employ me to do that, I'm offering my services. But anyway, I mean, there's a lot else. We could have a whole other workshop on some aspects of what I'm talking about. But I don't want to, that's not what this is about today. But I'm really urging you to put in a baseline so that over periods you can track. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to hand this to Ashley. But just to say that two-part process, dealing with the title deed and then maintaining the title deed over time. And Lisa, I'll come to you just now after Ashley makes her comment, because I think you can speak to that.
So just in terms of how we start to scale and make this process bigger, you guys have great relationships with all the stakeholders and easy to pick up the phone and, you know, get something. But how, if we then move this process across the country, are we going to build those relationships? Is it going to be another sticking point until we get the processes to flow? Or is there a way that this isn't relationship dependent, in an ideal world, I guess?
Yeah, I know. I wish. Hey, Ilan, I'll come back to you on that. In fact, while I hand this over, do you want to speak to the first question?
It's Rosie, is it? I really like that. I really like that suggestion, Rosie. It's not something that we have really given much thought, but I think critical. You know, there are some clients that you develop a relationship with over time and that you do kind of follow their progress, but obviously that progress to date has been short. You know, you've regularized a title deed 2 years ago, you're only 2 years down the line. So to your point, that definitely needs to be extrapolated forward. I really like that idea. I think there's some work to be done in that space. Thank you.
Do you want to respond to Ashley's question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, Seth and Karen, whether you actually aren't better placed to respond, just working closely with the metros, because I think that is going to be very difficult for us, and we would want to probably leverage your expertise and your relationships in there. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to comment on this, not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah, it's not an easy process. You know, building relationships, it's complex and it takes time. There's an element of trust as well, you know, that is involved in building relationships. But we've been working with the TSC team now over 3 years, I would say, or more. And of course, we are biased towards the cities because we are in the city support program. And so we have a philosophy that says, if you get the cities working, then you are getting the whole country working, because that's where the bulk of the problem is. And so we are seeing them 8 metropolitan municipalities as being the ideal, you know, entry points to start building those relationships. But of course, at a national level as well, we're working with the team to strengthen also the relationships at that level, like with the National Department of Human Settlements. We've got a good relationship as Treasury, you know, with the team. We've also been bringing on board the Department of Justice, as well as also, you know, the Deeds Office. And so things seems to be, you know, moving in that regard, slowly, of course, but at least people are gaining confidence now into this whole, you know, process. The other element, of course, that is very critical is really strengthening the relationships at a local level in communities now, you know, with the NGOs and the CBOs. That's another area basically that we're going to be putting attention to, because we've got some lessons in the Makasa projects in terms of working with the councillors, but not to control the process, just to get the support from them, as well as also the local leadership. And so we can see the process is quite complex, but from a government perspective, at least we are beginning to see some inroads. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Seth. I mean, it is actually lots and lots of relationship, because that's how it starts. And in fact, that makes sense because we're talking about title deeds, and title deeds are a trust document. So it's about building the trust around that. But hopefully over time, that trust goes beyond our immediate conversation to a more generalizable level. Yeah. Ivan.
Thanks very much, Casey. This is very impressive. There's no doubt about it. It's fascinating to hear this story. 5 years of really hard graft, and the experience of that is immeasurable. So a few comments. I mean, I think firstly, you've quantified the cost, which is very useful, 100,000 a month. I think it's really important to balance that with trying to quantify the benefits as well, because it's a bit vague, right, frankly, in terms of really, it's kind of emotional a bit. You know, it really matters to the financial system, it really matters to cities, and it matters to households, but there's contradictory evidence. We heard that issue about informal sales. You mentioned yourself that 81 beneficiaries who were eligible to get their sale agreement haven't actually gone to the office to collect it. So, you know, why doesn't it matter more to people I think is a really big issue. There must be aspects of education there. People don't appreciate the value, but there are other things too, that the informal system in some respects works for many people, right? So I think really quantifying and demonstrating the long-term benefits and value of this is really important. And I don't think, last point, I don't think you can just give up, Ilana, on changing policy in the system. We can't afford to, because it's not an either or, of course. We have to work on the ground and capture the learning, and that intensive work is vital. But we also have to work to change the system and simplify some of these crazy rules and laws, because otherwise, you're hitting your head against a brick wall. And we have to find a way to make a compelling case for system change using insiders who've got the track record, but also the pressure of civil society and of this evidence to make a stronger case. So the government has to listen.
You answered your question again, because that plea right there suggests that it's worth doing. And I think that the value of the title deed is recognizable when it's valuable. But if the transaction process doesn't work in the way that we've seen, and if people aren't using it, then it isn't valuable. That's true. That's true. It's a fictional thing. But when it does work, and when it all connects so that everybody has one, that's when the synergy happens. So there is an element of trust there, right? Where we're trying to build an economy that functions because all the rules are followed and that everybody knows who owns what. You can see, and I think that, Ilana and Lisa can speak to it, and Sona can speak to it, that the conflict that arises when those rights aren't clear. And I think the evidence also that people who are now transacting informally come much more quickly to the TSC to say, like, can we sort this out now? So our view is that there are serious barriers to the process that make informality much easier in the short term. But people are recognizing that, in fact, that's a very short-term solution. And in the long term, they're at risk. And certainly for the city, and for the private sector, it's a huge risk. So we have to build the faith in the system by making the system work. Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Bolnick from Ikayalami. Firstly, I think it's an amazing work that you've done. Maybe just 2 comments. One, when you're looking for funding, I think your obvious place to look for funding, rather than be dismissive to government, is to actually say that that's where the pot should be. And the private sector should be adding into that pot, not your private sector being your main people that are keeping you afloat. Because for government, it should be a no-brainer, because every title deed that is affirmed is another success to their housing subsidy program. So I don't think you should, walk away from trying to access money from the state. I know it's incredibly hard, but you have allies who believe in this program and who are here. And then, Rosalie just triggered something in my mind about what you were trying to do is to tackle the title deeds that are in question. So they've never been registered. What about the 2 million that have been registered? And what kind of informality has happened in those 2 million? Are they actually now in this gray zone? And who's going to tackle that?
Thanks, Andy. Ilana, Lisa, do either of you want to comment? Hand over to Zama.
Yeah, no, I can comment. No, Andy, exactly. I mean, that's exactly what the TSC is there to do. And I agree that on the primary transfers, it is government's job to fund and to sort that out. Yeah, Ivan, it's just fascinating. Your comments are right. I mean, that is correct, that we shouldn't lose hope. Sure, I've lost hope. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say, and I just, there are times I'm speechless. It's not often, but, and I'm very thankful a lot of our meetings are on Zoom and I can switch off my camera and switch off my microphone and go absolutely nuts and start screaming and shouting because it is actually unbelievable. So I just don't know. And it feels to me that the sort of traditional tools that we have around community mobilization, it's exactly what we don't want. We don't want more disruption. We don't want more marches. We just you know, so I think you're right. And we're hoping that maybe next year there'll be something to pick up on. In the meantime, we do need to get on with it. Yeah, I think Rosalie, your point's always correct. You know, my husband's become a fan of the Austrian School of Economics, and he watches or he listens to an economist who says, you know, like, you know, when you kick a ball, you know where it's going to go. When you kick a person, you don't know what's going to happen. And we are dealing with people, and we're dealing with very complex social contexts that we don't understand. We've got no clue. But this is a mechanism that it doesn't guarantee anything. And just because someone's got a title deed, it doesn't mean that they're going to preserve it. It doesn't mean that when they want to add 3 rental units at the back of their property, that they're going to submit plans for approval. It doesn't mean they're going to pay their water bill, but without it, they're definitely not. So I think it's the necessary, not necessarily sufficient condition. And I do think it's really kind of, you know, just trying to put in place those building blocks that allow greater integration between different areas of a city, you know, so that there's not one system that operates in Khayelitsha and another system that operates in suburbs, that, you know, there's something that everybody can navigate. I think that is the vision. So maybe we mustn't lose hope just yet. And maybe we must continue to engage. We must continue to engage. This always reminds us of that. But it hasn't been an easy journey. And I think we've just got to push on. You've got to push on, because it's not going to get easier.
I think the benefit of being part of a team is that you all play different parts. And we each take the bowl in different times. Zama, please go ahead.
Evening, everyone. Zama from DEG. Ilana, you cannot give up now. I think the people that are here value the work that you are doing. And I think as DEG, we've been there in the trenches with you. I remember your first office in Makaza, being banned and everything else. I think for me, I agree with you. The context is changing. Things are becoming very difficult to operate in the townships. I was saying in one platform, 10 years ago, I was never scared to go to Philippi. But now I'm very scared to go to the townships. I think twice before I go to have a meeting where we assist different communities. But for me, I think correct to say this is a partnership approach. One thing for me that maybe you did not mention, I know in South Africa, in most cases, for things to happen, we need those political principles. Have you engaged any? And for me, how do we start to assist each other, maybe as a sector, so that when we go to these platforms, we go there as a collective. For example, I was reading something today written by the mayor. He always speaks about micro developers. And it's something that has been pushed by the sector. And we've got a political principle in the mayor. And maybe around this, as a sector, I think we need a political principle, locally, but also nationally, because this is happening all over the country. I always say the discussion around property ownership is not something that was discussed in the dinner table for most of us. And the other thing that comes in, I'm happy there's colleagues from the public sector. How do we also start to strengthen education around property ownership and transactions? Because I always say, while we are here, there's someone who's thinking about selling a house. And even those cases that you have solved, the beneficiaries of those, maybe the mother is going to go to the Eastern Cape or something happens, then the children will take over. Then we'll go back from where we were. And how do we start to also strengthen the component of homeowner education? Because homeowner education is not just about maybe getting a key and renovation, but there's other components. And how do we make sure, maybe as a sector, civil society organizations, we push the public sector to pay for that? If they don't have capacity, then the NGOs have got the capacity to partner with government so that they can push that. But I think for me, that's something that is missing. Thank you very much.
mean, I think such an important thing. Can you give you the mic just to the person in front of you, Zama? Oh, you want to come in on that right now? Okay. Okay. Oh, he's done it. Okay. Great. Yeah. And then I'm to you, Aubrey. I saw you. Yes.
I'm Jens Horber from a Sunday Institute. In terms of the policy changes needed and kind of how to drive that, I think the one issue obviously is it's not a human settlements issue only. As we saw on the slides, it involves different departments at a national level, obviously at a provincial level and local level. So in some ways, this almost has to be a presidential project. I mean, I understand like the office of the presidency, there's a lot of presidential projects, but obviously like the argument around Operation Vulindlela could be expanded to say this is a human settlements issue, it's a cross-cutting issue, and if it's driven in that way to integrate it and to get those different departments to work together to solve the issue in an integrated way, that's important. And the other point I'd like to make is that at the moment there's actually a review process, a white paper process that's actually happening in terms of human settlements policy, and it's actually a good opportunity now, because obviously these processes don't come along that often, to actually sort of engage with the National Department of Human Settlements, obviously together with other departments, to say, if we're going to do any policy changes now, these kinds of changes have to happen now, and these are the costs and these are the benefits. So in terms of not losing hope, I think that's an opportunity to kind of take that window and harass the president also, maybe a little bit.
Absolutely. I mean, the one thing I was going to say with to Zama's point is we think we have a political champion. We think that the president talked about this in his State of the Nation address, and it is an Operation Vulindlela program within the presidency. Growing that, I agree with you, but we were very excited that the president had identified that as well. Yes.
Thanks. I have a question for Lisa, and it's around what Zama also talked about, the education part of it, because I bought my first property a few years back, and even with the resources I have available, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. I didn't know what I would needed to do. And now that I own the property, there's also things that sort of spring up that I didn't know. Well, if you wanted to build a braai outside, now I needed to send something to the city and they need to. And I was wondering, do you have sort of, out of your own personal experience, how many of the people that come to the TSC, is the problem education based in terms of, I just didn't know I needed to do this? And how many, because you talked a lot about the price and it's too expensive, and how many are there of those people are there that come to you and say, well, I knew I needed to do this, I just couldn't afford to do this?
That's a great question. I think, and I can reference it back to the differences that we're seeing in the kind of informal sales that are being referred to us. I think historically, so what we call the historic sales, the really old ones, like I bought it in 1992 and I've never done anything. I think at that time in low income areas, there was almost like, and I'm speaking anecdotally, the street committees put a system in place, which was an informal system, and people believed that that was the system, and people subscribed to that system. So I think a lot of lack of information and a lot of ignorance as to formal processes. I think that has changed. My perception is that has changed. We have had quite a few clients who've come in, even with a signed sale agreement, so a proper valid sale agreement for a property, which they've maybe been to an attorney to draw up for them. but then it becomes a cost issue. And I think also to some extent the cooperation of the other party. So you as a purchaser might realize that in actual fact there is a formal process that needs to be followed. But if you've got a seller who still subscribes to the old system, those two don't speak to each other. To your point about education, I mean, so if I look at our clients who purchase properties with bonds, they're few and far between, but we do have them. And F&B done a lot of great work in that space to try and make the concept of buying a home and the process of buying a home accessible and easier to people in terms of understanding what's going on. But I look at these clients, you know, that buy with a bond, and I think of every single step of the way the TSC holds their hand. And I think if we weren't there, you know, they come to us and they say, I've been told I have to get an insurance. I don't know what that is. I don't know why I need it. So yes, there is a lot of work to be done in this space. I probably flippantly said I would understand how to buy a property. I realize that I'm wearing my conveyancer cap when I say that, and that actually a lot of people, even sitting here, might not understand that process. And so even more so, I think, in the low income area. Does that answer your question?
We've got a couple other questions. I'm going to take one from here and we're going to wrap up. So you have one as well, right? Let me just ask this one from Zoom, because they did ask. So this is a question from David Gardner, and he's actually interested in outside of South Africa and the impact that this has in other areas. So are people's transactions outside of South Africa's formal systems the problem, given that these systems often fail at source, or are the formal systems too complex, too onerous and expensive? Are there other approaches, tools, technologies that we should be considering? So, quickly.
Yeah, I'd say, David, I'd say yes to all of that. Yeah, the technology opportunities are wonderful and really exciting. And I think for me personally, that's something I'd like to spend more time on. You know, when you look at a problem like this, and we've got our little triangle where we kind of like try to, you know, make the formal system a little bit more accessible. The other option is to work from the bottom up and to say the formal system, you know, as people have said, kind of works. Can we strengthen it? So what do we do to just create irrefutable evidence of a transaction? That's what we need to do. And then how do we manage to share that broadly? And you know, I'd hate anyone to think that I'm trying to undermine the formal property titling processes in South Africa. That's not the objective at all. But these informal systems, I think, can teach us quite a lot about accessibility and about understandability and simplicity and technology. As I mentioned, the self-sovereign ID technologies that exist, the opportunities to avoid fraud through validating identities. It is a seriously exciting space. I'm not a programmer, I'm not a developer, so I can't do this myself, but I think this is a wonderful opportunity to look at. And maybe the formal system will catch up. You know, if you build something robust from the bottom up, maybe that is a more effective way of driving change in the formal system than sitting in endless Zoom meetings that don't go anywhere. So
okay, yeah, just a quick comment is that the two worlds are just too different. The formal world, you know, you have Cape Town here and you have Khayelitsha. What happens in Khayelitsha as compared to what happens is a extreme different world. And I think the work that you're doing is to try as much as possible to really deal with the chaos that is in there, because it's extreme chaos. And any NGO that works in there is making a difference. But Zama is making a point around the lawlessness, and sort of it's deteriorating by the day. And we would have a society where you have just one chaotic, and it will affect everyone in the long term. So the work that you're doing should not be at that scale. It should be at a much bigger scale. I saw the money, 100,000 Rand per month. I thought, like, that's cheap compared to the work that is supposed to be done and the scale. And particularly the Western Cape is much more chaotic, more than even Gauteng, in terms of that area that you're operating in, not only in terms of just the title deed, but just generally. There's just too many issues and problems. I work in there on a daily basis. I've been in Cape Town for 10 years, and the level of deteriorating of whatever we expect as society has gone from one area to extremely bad. So the work that we need to do is only the beginning. There's just too much to be done. That's all I.
Thank you so much for that comment, because I think it is such a critical issue. And the one thing that we've seen too, I mean, if you look at the progress of property prices over the last 20 years, and government subsidized properties coming in originally at amounts of less than 100,000 Rand is what the government spent on them. And those properties are now worth 200, 300,000 Rand, and the potential for conflict around that, if relationships aren't clear, is critical. I mean, it's a really important issue. And I think that's part of the hypothesis, is that some of these informal transactions that are coming to the TSC are suddenly because this is a really valuable asset, and that creates a whole lot of tensions. Can I ask the TSC team if there is anything else that you want to talk about in this forum, or shall we go and have something to drink and a little bit to eat? Anything else that you would like to add? Okay, can I just thank everybody here? We are still here for conversation, and we hope you stay as well. We've got some drinks and some snacks, and we'd really love to hear your ideas. I agree, 100,000 Rand is cheap at the price, especially in terms of the long-term stability that impact that creates for the wider city. It reverberates beyond the individual title deed. So ideas about how to find all of those 100,000 Rands and really how to address this. I'm very mindful of the great partnership that exists. We've said it a couple times, but we really don't want to overlook that and have anyone suspect that we're not so grateful for it. This partnership between the public sector, the private sector, and households themselves trying to sort it out makes a really, really big difference. And we're very happy that everybody's here and wanting to solve these issues together. We done? Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.